Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, the 2025 Biennial Juried exhibition, juried by Deidre Hamler, Wendy Earle, and Charlotte Gordon. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist Mabi Ponce de Leon. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Mabi.
Hi, everybody. Today's talk, I will introduce you to my work through three lenses. Autobiographical first, and then I will talk about some academic influences, and then the rest will be artistic. Through these lenses, you will get a better sense of how I explore topics through my art practices. Let's begin. Hello, I'm Mabi Ponce de Leon. I was born in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, one of 7 Andean nations. However, I grew up on the flatter eastern side of the country in Buenos Aires, the capital that sits along the wide Rio de la Plata, or the River of Silver, if you want to translate the word. And I grew up drinking yerba mate, a popular infusion made from a type of holly tree known as Ilex paraguayensis. Although the native Guarani creators of mate called it ca, most mate drinkers use the Quechua word mate to describe the drink. This is because Quechua became the dominant language across the dominated regions of the Inca. Seeing my work in the show, you might wonder if I have an Andean family connection. Quechua continues to be spoken in all Andean nations. Quechua words made their way into the Spanish in all local regions of the Andes, starting in the colonial era, and have remained part of the language. So I grew up, without even realizing it, I grew up speaking a Spanish peppered with Quechua words. Andean culture informed my Southern South American life. My paternal grandfather was from Tucumán in northwest Argentina. Western Tucumán sits in the Andes Mountains in the southernmost regions of the Inca Empire. My grandfather was a nurturing and patient person. He had time to speak with me, happy to teach me new words and ideas. He had time to be with me as an elder, as an adult. I would come to reconnect with my grandfather's ways through so many people that I met in my recent Andean experiences. My uncle has also been a very special person in my life. When we lived in Buenos Aires, he took me everywhere in his little Fiat. He was my favorite uncle. My paternal grandparents and uncle and aunt lived in Buenos Aires, and we were very close. We went on vacation together, and I spent a lot of time with them. We went to parks, played board games. My grandfather read to me and taught me about maps. They were my South American family. Since before I was born, my mother's people, my mother's parents and sister, lived in South Florida. My grandfather was an accountant for the National Airline of Argentina, and he was transferred to their Miami offices. This geographic duality was the norm of my life. I loved the vibrant city where I lived. My aunt, my mom's younger sister, eventually married and started a family. We all attended her Miami wedding. My maternal grandparents visited us, and we visited them too. They were my North American family. I was less familiar with them, and traveling long distance north and south to see my family marked my life. If you're wondering the distance, it's a long distance from Buenos Aires to Miami. We moved to the US in December of 1976 when I was almost 11 years old. That was the last time I saw my beloved paternal grandparents. They both passed away young and far from us. Living in South Florida took me years to get used to. I miss my family and friends, the 4 seasons of Buenos Aires, and the places I loved. It was hard to return home. This weighed heavily, and I felt out of place. However, in time, I came to know and love the local plants, animals, and natural landscapes of the beaches and the Everglades. In South Florida, I graduated from high school and enrolled in the local state university. In time, this search for an anchor would become a theme in my art practice. These are my academic influences. I was fortunate to receive a full scholarship to attend FIU, or Florida International University in Miami. FIU was a critical place for my intellectual and artistic formation. Here, I majored in fine arts and took studio and art history courses that guided my development as a young artist and thinker. One of my first professors I met was Manny Torres. Dr. Torres was my first influential art history professor. Dr. Torres is a Latin Americanist who studies indigenous cultures of Southern South America. I took many art history courses from Dr. Torres. Additionally, Manny nurtured in us a love and interest in the indigenous cultures of the world. When I was a student, he was researching Inca graves in northern Chile. As an art major, I focused on drawing, painting, and photography. Although painting was my medium of focus, I learned to see through my photo and photo history courses. Professor Bill McGuire is a photographer of night scenes and a student of the great Gary Winograd. He rode a motorcycle and carried his Leica 35mm SLR, film SLR, that is, everywhere he went. While everyone was coming to Miami for spring break, Bill McGuire and painting professor Jim Cooper took us to New York City each year to see art galleries and museums. These annual art department visits to New York were seminal in my growth as a young artist. Bill shows at Dina Matrani Gallery in Miami's Wynwood district these days. He's still active. I also took painting from Professor Sandy Winters. I credit Sandy with teaching me oil painting. Sandy Winters eventually became my thesis advisor. She was a dynamic painter who taught me to use oil paint and achieve the color and texture I wanted in my work. When I was her student, she was showing at Frumkin Adams Gallery in New York, now called George Adams Gallery. I was fortunate that all my studio professors had active professional careers. I received my BFA in 1988 and applied to a couple of MFA programs. Stony Brook University offered me a fellowship to study there, and I accepted. Stony Brook's MFA program was one of the earliest 3-year MFAs in the US. At Stony Brook, I took full advantage of both studio and art history graduate courses. One of my professors was Dr. Barbara Frank, an art historian focusing on Africa. Barbara taught me to read art historical research critically, understand the history of Africanist research and methodology, and to write academic papers. As a field expert who taught us contemporary research styles that replaced old Eurocentric anthropological methods, Barbara was formative in my intellectual growth. While I was at Stony Brook, I was fortunate to meet and work with Kay Walkingstick, a Cornell University art professor who spent a few semesters at Stony Brook. Kay Walkingstick is an oil painter with an extensive experience in working with landscape elements and abstraction, and the marriage of both. Her critiques were foundational in my development as an artist, and her questioning style made me think more deeply about my ideas and work. From her, I learned to use Dorland's wax medium in my oil paint to achieve a variety of textures and to scrape into my canvas surfaces. Kay always had a New York gallery representing her work in those days, still does. In recent years, she has had a huge retrospective at the Smithsonian that also traveled to other museums across the US. Additionally, her work is collected in major US museums. We still talk. And I also met Professor Howardina Pindell in my first visual arts seminar. I was a very lucky person. There I saw her seminal 1980 video, Free White and 21, which is now in the collection of the Whitney Museum. Howardina made us think deeply about the role of history, gender, and race in society, a topic that resonated greatly with me. Howardina is a celebrated painter, mixed media, and installation artist who received her BFA and MFAs in the 1960s and early on worked at MoMA as a curator before coming to Stony Brook to teach. A master of color, Howardina studied under Joseph Albers at Yale. She always was represented by a New York gallery. Currently, it's Garth Greenan. More recently, her work is in museum collections across the US and beyond. She continues to have solo shows and has been included in the PBS Art 21 series more recently. She's a dynamo. I also worked with Professor Mel Pekarsky, a painter, landscape artist of the Southwest, who focused on ecological themes. Mel was a parental figure to me. He took care of his students and taught us about the art world. He also led a visual arts seminar where we read and discussed important topics of artistic relevance. I took an independent study with Mel also to learn to prepare traditional mediums and surfaces for painting. For instance, rabbit skin glue over linen and true plaster gesso over board. Mel's work is collected across the US and abroad too. Unfortunately, we just lost Mel in October. So it's hard. It was in graduate school that I had time and great facilities to explore printmaking finally. Under the direction of Professor Martin Levine, I work with traditional and experimental intaglio methods, stone and plate lithography, and also linoleum and woodcuts. Professor Levine primarily works with intaglio, producing hyper-realistic images in black ink. His printmaking expertise and his connections enabled me to become a competent printmaker and incorporate this medium into my art practice. His work is in collections also across the US. And he introduced me to New York City-based master printer, Kathy Caraccio. She's a special person too. New York City native and master printer Kathy Caraccio founded her studio in 1977, first on Bowery, where I went, and these days in Chelsea. After her BFA, Kathy continued training with experts on all matter of printmaking, including etching, color print, viscosity printing, paper making, and Japanese hanga water-based woodblock printing. I love Kathy, and I discovered many new techniques and processes working in her studio. As an intern, I helped master printer Kathy and her staff pull editions for big-name artists. It was a thrill to work with her and a time of huge technical growth. In my late 40s, I embarked on another experience. I felt in my years of study, I had not encountered the history of Latin American art. In the spring before being accepted into the program, History of Art program at OSU, I took a graduate History of Argentina course from Dr. Donna Guy, a professor who specializes in Argentine history, state power, and gender topics. That semester in Donna's graduate seminar, I read and responded to 10 books that helped reframe my knowledge of Argentine history and helped me focus on a research topic. Over the semester and through the years at OSU, Donna became my intellectual mother, someone whom I love and trust. Even though she retired from teaching at the end of that semester, Donna checked in on me regularly and she encouraged me. I cherish her friendship and guidance. Going back to graduate school was one of the toughest but best things I did in my life. The first 2 years, I took a sabbatical from teaching to focus on my coursework and teach for the department. It was a pure joy to walk in each day, to read, to write, to attend lectures, to discuss topics. After my second year, I went back to teaching, and my academic process slowed down considerably. Besides taking courses in the history of art and history departments, I also took courses in gender and sexuality studies and in the Spanish and Portuguese department. Eventually, my research led me to write a dissertation investigating the consensual responses of 20th century Argentine women against repressive military governments. My brilliant advisor, Dr. Byron Hammond, he specializes in early modern cultural transatlantic connections between the Americas and Europe. As the Latin Americanist in my department, he became my advisor. I took and enjoyed all the courses Byron offered in our department, and I greatly appreciated his thorough and thought-provoking reading lists and his helpful comments on my writings. I know I became a better scholar under his guidance. I also met Dr. Laura Podolsky at OSU in the Spanish and Portuguese department when I took her seminar on film of Brazil and Argentina. Laura specializes in film and literature. I read and studied her book, Specular City, in Donna's class, and was so excited to meet and work with Laura while at OSU. Her edits and writing comments were incredibly useful, both in her class and later, both in my MA and then PhD research and writing. Her geographic region of study, her time period and area coincided with my research interests, so it was great. I was very grateful to receive her advice during my dissertation writing. Dr. Gisela Latorre was also one of the first people I met at Ohio State University. She's a professor of the OSU Women and Gender Department. As an art historian, her courses are cross-listed with the history of art. Gisela specializes in muralism and gender, both in the US and in Latin America. I was fortunate to take several of her courses. Gisela's guidance in both the MFA and PhD research were invaluable. Additionally, Gisela is a brilliant, kind, and accomplished fiber artist who makes a lot of what she wears, these beautiful knitted and crocheted pieces she wears. Her most recent research work, documents women muralists in her home city, Santiago de Chile. All right, now I'm going to talk about my art. In graduate school, I became interested in the connections between architecture and spirituality. I saw architecture design as a manipulation of space, sound, and housing for transformative experiences. As an architecture nerd, I was fascinated by theater designs, the acoustics, the stage, the pit, and the accommodations for people to be spiritually transformed through the performance. I also studied the architecture designs of religious structures as theatrical and spiritual designs. These architects found ways to produce taller, more acoustically sound structures with embedded meanings, sites for daily performances that people could read, feel, see, hear, and smell. At this time, I also explored this fish motif. Not only are fish symbolic in many spiritual traditions, but humans see fish as not only beautiful, but also contemplative. We look at them for their movements, their forms, their colors. They help us relax. Humans also see them as free, miraculously living in water, something we cannot do. I was then using oil paint, wax medium, oil pastels, and experimented with layering, overlapping forms, and using different viscosities of paint. While in grad school, I finally had my own studio, and I worked on a larger scale with a variety of media. I didn't have to store my materials and projects after each class. I was working with mixed media on large paper and achieving different textures through various drawing processes. In addition, I had access to the printmaking studio at Stony Brook and began experimenting with both intaglio and lithographic processes. Experimenting with intaglio, I not only used traditional aquatint, soft ground, and hard ground techniques, but I did more experimental processes like sugar lifts as well. Experimenting with lithography, I made full use of their wonderful collection of lithographic stones, but I also explored plate lithography. After graduating from Stony Brook, I moved to Columbus for a year and then was hired to teach full-time at the University of Monterrey in Northeast Mexico. I was a studio professor there. It was my first time living in a dry, mountainous city, and I was struck by the landscape and having to navigate driving around mountains. I lived on the Cumbres side of the majestic Las Mitras mountain, while the university was located clear on the opposite side of Las Mitras in the neighborhood of San Pedro. Living in the shadow of Las Mitras, I admired its Joshua trees and various rocky peaks. My work began to reflect this landscape as I found elements that made me feel at home in this new city and country. Mexico's northeast region of North America is rich with mountains and petroglyphs. I set out to explore different sites to document rock formations and carvings left by ancient people who lived in the region. One of the most enduring images from that time was my proximity to Las Mitras, of course. This painting, Spirits of the Santa Catarina River, came out of an experience of being a new resident in Monterrey. Learning to drive in a mountainous city before the advent of GPS, I used a paper map and asked for directions whenever I got lost. One time, someone explained that I needed to take the road that crossed the Santa Catarina River. This was a confusing reference to me because I had not seen any rivers anywhere that I could recognize. It turns out that the person was referring to the riverbank parallel to Las Mitras that I crossed each morning going to and from work. Having never lived in a desert region, I didn't understand that the city's dry, rocky surfaces near Las Mitras was the river. When I asked, the locals told me that the water had been piped to feed the city's water system. However, I also learned that in the rare occasion that there's a storm, the riverbed could flood. I could not fathom a dry river, and I envisioned ghost fish swimming quietly across Las Mitras. Humanities Calendar was another view of Las Mitras. This time I began with a collage of an ancient Mesoamerican archaeological site. Then I superimposed the mountain and also some of the ancient petroglyphs of lunar calendars that I had seen about an hour from the city of Monterrey. The close-up view on the right shows some of the scars from the cement industry that Las Mitras has on one of the sides, a type of marking too by people. I wanted to superimpose the distant views of the mountain plus the extreme close-up views of the ancient carved petroglyphs, and then the new markings of the harvesting of rock by the cement industry in the region. Returning from Mexico to the US, I was still thinking of sites and stories related to its vast and diverse landscapes. I continued experimenting with both small and large works. The two on the left are mixed media paintings on canvas. The top left work explores the Nahuatl myth of Tocopacatepetl, which is the smoking mountain. It is a volcano, and Itzachihuatl, or the sleeping woman volcano. These are side by side in central Mexico. These are also the names of the same volcanoes. The myth involves a warrior and a princess, star-crossed lovers, whom by the end of the story end up dead side by side. The bottom left work superimposes a lunar calendar over the Teotihuacan Avenue of the Dead. Teotihuacan is an archaeological site just near Mexico City. And it shows the site from the point of view of the Temple of the Moon. Okay. The work on the right is a reduction block print of Las Mitras. The relief printing process enables me to scrape into the surface of these landscapes. I find the process of working every bit of the landscape surface meaningful as I am touching the surface of the rocks and soil. Lady of the Beasts is a Monterey landscape as well that I did in Colombia after living in Mexico. This studio exploration incorporates the ancient figure often called Lady of the Beasts. This archetype of a woman flanked by animals is found in the Asian art of many continents. I wanted to incorporate this figure that is one with the landscape and dominates over it. Rather than make the figure solid, I chose to make them silhouettes that appear throughout the landscape. The central figure is flanked by the silhouette of my dog Estrella, whom we adopted along with her sister Peanut when we lived in Mexico. Like working with relief prints, developing thick and thin layers of collage, oil, acrylic paint, and other media, and often scraping into these surfaces of the landscape feels like scraping into the earth of these personally meaningful landscapes. Sorry, I just had somebody came into my room. I'm obsessed with the forms. Coming back to Ohio, sorry, let's see. Coming back to Ohio, I began reading about the mound builder societies and I became obsessed with visiting the mounds. I kept revisiting both the Serpent Mound and the Newark Circle Mound in my art. The mounds became meaningful places, places to think about the ancient people who left these immense monuments and are still speaking to us in the 21st century. The mounds also echoed many of the same archetypes I had seen in the petroglyphs in the ancient art of northern Mexico. This image is a simple play on the shapes of the Great Serpent in Adams County, Ohio. I'm obsessed with the forms and stunning location of the Serpent Mound on a ridge overlooking Brush Creek. If you've never been there, please go. It's gorgeous. I'm fascinated by mound builder designs and their connections with astronomy, geography, and agriculture. At the Serpent Mound, mound builders measured and designed the location of the serpent head and 3 body turns to solar alignments. The sun sets in alignment with the serpent head at the evening of the summer solstice. The first turn of the snake body aligns with the sunrise at the summer solstice. And the second turn aligns with the sunrise at both the fall and spring equinoxes. And then the third turn aligns with the sunrise at the winter solstice. If that doesn't blow your mind. The Newark Circle Mound is one of many Hopewell sites that have recently been designated UNESCO sites. These archaeological sites date from around 2,000 years ago and feature perfect forms and astronomical alignments as well. In this painting called Under the Talon, I explore the Newark Circle Mound's perfect forms superimposed by an enormous mica talon. The Hopewell culture created talon-shaped effigy objects made from mica sheets. We can only wonder at the significance of these objects that resemble a raptor's powerful claw. Archaeologists found these effigy mica forms at the Mound Group in Chillicothe, Ohio. After visiting this site, I made several series of reduction block prints on color handmade paper. I became fascinated by this beautiful, enormous multi-mound arrangement located on a cleared field, surrounded by mounds. I also continued exploring printed abstractions of the Serpent Mound. This beautiful earthwork lends itself to experimenting with abstract curves and overlapping forms. The images I carved from wood blocks retain the rougher textures of the wood onto the mound forms. I liked working the wood grain and the occasional knots and working in the occasional knots into the design. On the other hand, the line of expresses the smoothness and curvature of this large effigy mound. In my work, I often return to ideas and memories of my childhood growing up in Buenos Aires. And I did so through this series called Cono Sur, which means literally southern cone of South America. Okay. To develop these works, I collaged architectural floor plans and childhood photos, and then I began paint layering. March fall came from a memory of the fall season in my old neighborhood, of bare trees, gray skies, and crunching leaves under my feet. Fall in the Southern Hemisphere begins in March, and that is also my birthday month, so it was meaningful to me. Theater of the Soul recalls a childhood experience, or many experiences really, of visiting the theater with my family. Live performances in that enormous downtown opera house were unforgettable experiences to me. I still think about them. I also explored the length and geographic location of my country of birth through using latitude and longitude lines. Both of these works began with map collages and tourist guidebook style images of beautiful destinations. From there, I began to layer, paint, scrape, and distort forms. Austral, or southern, that's the painting on the left, plays with the changing landscape and weather from north to south, whereas the southern hemisphere upside down work on the right makes light of the geographic position of Argentina, literally at the bottom of the world, and with people walking upside down, if you picture where we are. Okay. Those of us who come from the southern part of the southern hemisphere often think about walking with their feet facing north. I even flipped the painting upside down and allowed the sky colors to drip down. I don't know if you can see that in this slide. This painting, River of People, River of Silver, also began with many collage maps and then layers and layers of paint. The image shows an iconic part of downtown, focusing on 9th of July Avenue and its unending lanes of traffic and people. In the far distance, you can see the river, the Rio de la Plata, named after what Spaniards hoped to find, but I don't think they did find. The last paint layers include a light yellow map of the capital of Buenos Aires. And like in the previous two works, I layered paint, scraped, and distorted the forms to come up with something different. Along with the paintings in the Cono Sur series, I made a group of mixed media paperworks. Here I collaged maps, photos, theater floor plans, penguins, and I used some Mexican amato wood pulp paper, which was beautiful. On top of the collage, I used drawing materials and acrylic paint. And I have three representative images here for you. The one on the left, the matrix, features a map of the capital of Buenos Aires with floor plans for a popular theater in the capital. The one in the middle, self-portrait upside down. It tells you what it is, right? You have upside down image of little Mabi and floor plan of the same theater from the work on the left. And then on the right, you see a work called Penguins and People, and it blends collaged and drawn Magellanic penguins. These are the penguins that typically live in the southern Atlantic. And then also latitude and longitude lines in most of these paperworks. All right. I continued with doing a lot of these paper mixed media works. They were portable and they were fun to do. This is the Caracol series. Here I focus on shell and human forms in fetal positions. I collage shells, bodies, and maps superimposed over longitudinal and latitudinal lines. I had bought an old book of shells from which I collaged the shell forms, and those shell forms really dictated each of the designs. The bodies echoed the shells. In this matrix series, I collaged my child's chromosomes, and continued using shell images. This served as a continuation of the Caracol mixed media works. The chromosome map provided fresh new material to collage and an interesting concept to see a person's code on paper. This time, the map belonged to someone dear to me rather than being a generic body or form. I continued working with my second child's chromosome map in the Generis series. This time, rather than shells, I collaged notebook pages with contraction times, feeding schedules, and other data from the birth of my second child. Instead of using a paper surface, this time I worked on stretched canvas. The 42 series were small paintings that I did. They were 6 by 6 that I did to get back to the studio after having 2 children and continuing to work full time. I used acrylic paint, a limited palette, and a limited painting time. At first, I did self-portraits, and later I branched out into interests that I had in the land, in plants, and my beloved places. Here are 3 examples. The one on the left is one of my mate tree explorations. The work in the middle shows Buenos Aires again, and the work on the right revisits the Ohio mound builder sites. These South Atlantic studies came after. They were more literal, focusing on the animals as animals rather than as symbols. But they helped me prepare for the larger migration series that I was to do soon after this. For my migration series, I envisioned 9 canvases, images of migrating animals associated with the southern cone of South America. This included several types of whales, penguins, and condors. In addition, I envisioned boats, airplanes that carried people emigrating across the globe. I made this series for the Ohio Art League, a show called Espejismos, or Mirages, that featured a group of Latina artist friends, including the artist Micaela Vivero, whose work is in this biennial show. In addition, the show included Elena Osterwalder, Egle Gatan, Elsie Sanchez, and Flo Gouvry. Through migrations, I explored people and animal movement across the globe. The titles of each canvas also allude to both animal and people movements. For instance, the canvas with the penguin on the left is called Austral, which means southern. This flightless bird formed the logo also for an airline called Austral. The central canvas is called Sonar, alluding to the ways that whales emit and receive sounds across oceans to sense depth and objects as well. The technology also enables boats to measure depth, sounds, and objects underwater, as you all know. But the word sonar, in Spanish, sonar, it's the verb to sound, and it relates to the sound, to the word sonido, which means sound, the noun. For the painting on the right, I painted 2 condors, one a natural animal and the other an old condor logo for the airline of Argentina. My next series revisited Ohio mound builder sites. I developed a series of 9 18 by 18 canvases. I was interested in exploring abstractions again, and I focused on the serpent mound. I started with collage diagrams of the serpent mound, and then I began my paint layering and scraping. By this time, I was using acrylic paint. I was trying not to poison my children with oil paint. The large triptych called Effigy continues this abstract studio exploration of the serpent mound. I called it Effigy because this is an effigy mound, in this case, a mound in the shape of a snake. Again, I began with collage, and then I painted an accurate and proportionate diagram of the serpent mound at the center. And after that, I continued with unfolding abstractions throughout. As with most of my work, you can see things up close and you can see different images from a distance. These works form part of the Strand series, a series of that were carved out of linoleum and printed on paper. As a member of CAW, the Creative Arts of Women, I exhibited in the show Strands at the Carnegie Gallery, downtown, in the library. Thinking of this prompt, I envisioned the serpent mound immediately. These strands were made of earth and connected to the sun at significant times of year. Linoleum is the perfect medium for exploring these symbolic, culturally and historically important earthworks. Carving through and around these iconic forms felt like carving into the site itself. This painting is called Transplanted, and it has multiple meanings. I love playing with these ideas. The initial collage includes luggage tickets, boarding passes, images of airplanes, and more. Then I painted a map of the Americas with flight hub routes, upright. After that, I flipped the canvas horizontally and added a silhouetted fleet of jet airplanes over the large map. And then I flipped the canvas again and superimposed the floor plan and elevation plan of a turn of the 20th century passenger ship. These were the types of ships that people boarded to cross the Atlantic Ocean to emigrate to the Americas, to all the Americas. Some of my ancestors boarded ships like these to come to the Americas, and I'm sure many of your ancestors might have as well. America, that means North, Central, and South to me, was a continent of opportunity for people who crossed oceans and left everything they knew to help provide for their families. Like dug up plants, immigrants are transplanted to a new land. While working on Transplanted, I developed a series of small paintings exploring human movement around the Earth and the natural planetary forces. Whether traveling on the ocean or by plane, a navigation vessel must be aerodynamic, powerful enough to propel the vessel forward, sturdy enough to withstand ocean and air currents, and also flexible enough to not be destroyed by these same forces. The term vorticity relates to the Earth rotation forces in the Earth's atmosphere, but also in the ocean. For this series, I superimposed ocean current maps over a series of passenger jet silhouettes moving in different directions. I thought about the disorientation of not only traveling long distances, but also the idea of immigrants, migrants, and refugees leaving home far away and having to make a new place feel like home. Rather than working deep layers into these images, I made a conscious effort to leave thin layers to completely expose the underlying collages. Around this time, I digitized all my childhood photos, which were mostly 35mm slide film. I envisioned the matrix or mother as the womb-like map of Buenos Aires, as I've said before, and I used a photo of boarding a flight superimposed by the map of Greater Buenos Aires. I played with color variation and the repetition of the image. And this alludes to film and the passage of time and the remembrance of events as it's repeated over and again. Among the images I digitized was this faded and damaged image of my maternal grandparents boarding their flight to the US from Argentina. In those days, people walked onto the tarmac to board their planes. When we were kids, my grandparents brought us a Fisher-Price airport set. We loved that set. Back then, the figures were simple wood cylinder bodies with painted wood heads. The character, the green passenger that you see in front of you, was one of many, one of whom we pretended was our maternal grandfather, Jorge. He was an important character in the airport because he was always flying to us. In the background, I superimposed aerial images of my maternal grandfather's home neighborhood, La Boca, which was the old port of the city. This mixed media work on heavy printmaking paper, later developed through layering. At first I collaged some fish illustrations from a wonderful medieval bestiary that I found. I didn't cut the bestiary, I copied it. I also collage fish from other sources and fragments of images of water, different collage painted parts to develop human forms on the shore. Only one form remains, okay? The form with the arms raised. And then I began painting and drawing using a variety of medium to obscure some forms and bring out the others. And then to paint in details like breaking waves and the map of Mar del Plata, the city, and the skeletal figure at the bottom that is among the fish. The Mar del Plata dream painting is partially based on the life and mythic end of a poet and playwright from Argentina called Alfonsina Storni. She was from the early 20th century, died in 1938. Mar del Plata is a city on the Atlantic coast in the province of Buenos Aires, and it's several hours south of the capital. It was Storni's favorite city, and she went there to vacation and write. After she developed breast cancer and after a radical mastectomy did not cure it, she also went to her favorite city to die. Storni took her life by throwing herself into the ocean from a jetty. However, a popular myth says that she walked out onto the shore and kept walking until she drowned. Her body was found the next morning, washed up on the shore. In my image, I imagine Storni walking among the fish in her favorite city. In 2017, I applied and got into a program to study Andean philosophies and ways of thinking. My Andean experience reconnected me to the Andes and strengthened my research and my search for anchors in the land and the people. Professor Michelle Wibbelsman of the OSU Spanish and Portuguese Department led this life-changing educational experience. I learned that Andeans are millenarians, a culture that believes in cyclical time rather than linear time. And so it's an Andean time that is circular and never closes. The past is before us because we have already lived it. The future is behind us. We walk toward the future looking towards the past. This is what one of our instructors when we were in the Andes taught us. The philosophies and culture of the Andes are ancient, but still in use today. Okay, they come alive when you're there. Okay, these philosophies make Andean works come alive too. Okay, Andeans say rimarishpa, which means we live by communicating. Everybody says hello on the street. It's greetings and conversations among all the people of society, even if you don't know that person. My work was very influenced by that trip. This photo installation features a sacred waka or a sacred site in Otavalo in a city in Ecuador. And it's the milk tree. Árbol lechero means milk tree. I became fascinated with this meaningful site that overlooks the mountains Imbabura and Cotacachi in the landscape. While we were there, I circumambulated the tree, photographing it from all 4 cardinal points. The sky was filled with storm clouds, and the site looked surreal. When I envisioned this installation, I thought about putting Palo Santo or holy wood in the center. Not only would the wood stand in for the tree, but it would also recall the aromatic wood burned all over the Andes in secular and sacred Andean gatherings. I placed each view of the tree also in the direction of the cardinal point to which it corresponds. That way, the installation forms a chacana or a cosmic map of the Andean time spaces. Everywhere I go, I not only take photos, but I also collect rocks, soil, and other natural elements. I also like to document my shadow wherever I go. And I think of people who built these sites and the people who came before them. and then the people will come after I'm long gone. Walking across the Andes, I collected a lot of materials. In this photo installation, I placed 9 shadows over an archaeological site in Cusco, and then 9 vials of soil from that site. How much do we have time? Are we good? Okay.
We're so good. Keep going.
All right, awesome. This series is a mixed media and acrylic paint on canvas. It's called Axis Mundi. Axis Mundi refers to the belief in the existence of a cosmic axis around which the universe revolves. A central element of the landscape or sacred architecture typically represents the Axis Mundi. This work features 4 sites of personal importance in the Northern Hemisphere for me. Las Mitras Mountains in Monterrey, in Mexico. The West Meadow Beach in Suffolk County, New York, on Long Island. The mangroves of the Everglades in South Florida. And a special catalpa tree in Ripley, Ohio, right on the Ohio River. The canvas on the right shows one of the paintings at an early stage. You can see bare canvas, collage maps, and a painted sketch of the mangroves at the start. And you can see a little bit of blocking in colors. I painted the series using more muted tones, and then I did another version that has a more chromatic approach of the same theme. Lastly, I did a third work. I call this Axis Mundi 3, just to continue the focus. This time, my Axis Mundi was the milk tree, the árbol lechero from Otavalo. And so it's a single Axis Mundi. The Axis Mundi 3 uses all kinds of things, collage maps, acrylic paint, block printing, because I printed some images of the site also onto the canvas. Paint markers, sewing thread, and unstretched canvas I used. And then finally, I used old wood newspaper grippers from, the libraries that were discarded. And those were my top and bottom segments. I wanted it to look like an old map. Okay. This work, I layered thousands of dots counterclockwise around the tree. I aim to re-experience my circumambulation of this sacred site, this waka. The unstretched canvas and old wood newspaper grippers evoke a hanging map. Besides collaging a world ocean floor map, I printed liner cuts of the site over the map and superimposed acrylic marks and paint dots around the dominant central tree form. I had a 2-person show a few years ago, and I did a whole series of mountain water paintings for the show. So there were 6 paintings. The title alludes to the tradition of Chinese landscape paintings of the same name. I'm not comparing myself to these wonderful historic artists, but the idea came to mind. Here, I focused on the iconic shapes of 2 mountains, Imbabura on the left in the city of Otavalo, and then Las Mitras on the right in the city of Monterrey. The colors are more expressive here rather than natural, and each landscape flattens to reveal the mountain form. 2 more of the mountain water paintings here focus on trees and nearby water. On the left, the image mangrove reveals the mangrove roots miraculously thriving in salt water and serving as safe places for baby fish to grow up. They're usually the hatcheries for these animals. On the right, I featured my favorite jacaranda tree. They grow all over Buenos Aires. This is a local tree. I've been told that it's called jacaranda in the US, but it's jacaranda because it's a Guarani word. And they turn the city purple when they bloom in the spring. It's just a beautiful sight. For me, I used, colors that were not natural. Okay. Spring is not in March in the Southern Hemisphere. It's in the opposite season. All right, and so we come to the triptych that's in the show. I painted this triptych for a show with my Latina groups, with my Latina friends, and it was curated by Egle Gatan and Elena Osterwalder. It was the first large work I had painted in a long time, and it felt good to be working large again. I collaged maps and plants of the Sacred Valley in Peru. I added layers of paint, and I scraped, and I added more layers. And then I flattened some areas and made others thicker. I finally added 2 chacanas, cross-shaped forms. And the map of the Sacred Valley that crosses all 3 canvases with the Urubamba River and sacred sites. I enjoy providing elements that people can view up close and other elements that people can read from a long distance, and it's fun to play with those. This painting develops organically as I plan only the basic large forms and allow the process to dictate the rest. This is what I'm working on right now. This is my latest project. I've been reworking some of the photos from the Andean trip and creating installations of them. This particular one you can see is based on the same site from the painting. The site is called Pisac. And it's just beautiful. It has these arched terraces that are absolutely stunning. Each site was designed with terraces, all the sites in the Sacred Valley, designed with terraces for farming at different altitudes. Hydraulic systems provided water for the agriculture and for the people. And by the way, they still work. That's what's amazing. Granaries at each site stored grain. In addition, Andeans built housing, temples, and guardhouses at these sites. And every site was accessible through the Capacñan, or the sacred roads, which are still in use today, all over the former Andean Inca Empire. One of my favorite sites of Otavalo was the majestic mountain called Imbabura. You could see Imbabura from every angle of that city, and it became a point of direction to me. Locals call it Taita Imbabura, or Father Imbabura, an honorific title for the smoking giant kissed by the clouds. Stunning place. Visiting the salt pools, or maras, in the Sacred Valley was another surreal experience. I walked through the salt pools that are co-run by different families. This Peruvian made salt was coarse, delicious, and beautiful. I used glass jars to showcase the salt in my installation. While in Otavalo, we visited the town of San Clemente to partake in a pachamanca. Pachamanca is a meal. It's a meal made from the earth, and I'll explain. A deep hole in the ground is filled with heated pumice stones over which food is placed. After that, empty corn husks fill the remainder of the hole, and it is then covered with wet fabric and a tarp on top of that. Over the tarp, the host adds soil and invites all the guests to dance a circle around the pachamanca while people sing and play music. For my installation, I featured the pachamanca and food, and I also placed a wooden shelf with Andean corn. It's dried corn. This work, you can actually see it for another week or so, still at Roy G. Biv. It's a digital photo installation that includes a stunning example of Inca architecture and dry coca leaves below, real ones. The detail shows both a window and a niche of a sacred construction in one of the many archaeological sites around the Sacred Valley. People all over the Andes use still, and always have been, using coca leaves to relieve altitude sickness, an effective ancient practice. Some chew the leaves, while many others make a pleasant coca leaf tea, which is kind of minty. This work is I told you is in the Roy G. Biv show, Image, Ohio, so you can go see it. All right, I shot these photos in the Sacred Valley of Peru at a site that showed people drying potatoes. Okay, there are ancient practices in the Andes of drying meats and drying potatoes. If you've ever heard the word jerky, like meat jerky, beef jerky, the word in Quechua is charqui, and it might have a Quechua origin. Okay. Now, this is a site where they were drying potatoes, and they can be rehydrated and used. Okay. The installation includes both photos of the potato drying and also real dried Peruvian potatoes on a shelf, on a wooden shelf. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Visit my website and reach out to me if you have any questions.
All right, so we're right about at time, but I don't want to not have an opportunity for questions. If folks have them, please pop them into the chat and I'll get to them. So Mabi, what I notice is really striking about your work is your flexing of reality. So these, you know, this improvisational capacity that you have with your work, that you're really investigating and supporting the idea of chance and then building upon that. But the other piece that's really important is that research, the highlighting of the extraordinary wisdom of our past cultures. And so I was curious if you could speak about the importance of chance in your works and how that plays into how you complete a piece.
Yeah, I think chance is very important. I don't think I could pre-plan some of the things that happen, and I welcome that. The things that are preset are things that are like maps. You know, what I'm going to collage and the general composition, the general design, but color is not preset. I prefer to really kind of experiment, explore. Surface texture, not preset. I look back, I mean, I stand back and I look to see what I need to do. The painting tells me. It definitely.
Yeah, so there it's kind of a stew of sorts because plenty of folks really deeply enjoy some of the things that you've represented and will take the time to, you know, hyper realistically render it as like an ode and a respect to that.
Right.
But what I find interesting about your work is not only that improvisational quality, but the importance of overlaying in this almost uh, it has a surreal quality to it that invites a viewer to interpret. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of not being expressly representative in your work as well?
Absolutely. I think that I don't want to hit people over the head. Also, people don't all think in the same exact way. You get something different out of the same thing. And I think it's important to allow that space for the viewer. I don't claim to know everything. Absolutely not. Um, Ancient people, if I can get you to go look at some of these sites, you will learn more. Um, it's more, my paintings are more an exploration, a personal exploration, and maybe bringing to the attention of people some of these incredible places and the meaning behind them. But I don't want to spell out the meaning. I think that would be not good for the work. I think it would look like an illustration. I don't want to be illustrative. I want to be, again, I just want the colors, to take you someplace else, to take you to a different plane.
That's wonderful. Mabi, do you have anything you'd like to close out with to share with the audience?
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody who tuned in and who will tune in later. I appreciate your time.
Well, Mabi, thank you again so much for the generosity of your time and talent, and thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Mabi Ponce de Leon as a part of our programming for the 2025 Biennial Juried exhibition. A special thank you to our jurors, as well as all the other participating artists, the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.